Hello and welcome. I'm Sherry Schwab, the Building Industry of Washington's known as BIW 2020 President. It was quite an accomplishment to hear Governor Inslee authorize Phase 1 and the immediate start of residential construction in Washington State last Friday. Getting that announcement took weeks of work. We had nearly 1,300 safety pledge agreements from you to the governor. We had an outpouring of support from local, state, and federal officials. Our local associations, the BIW staff, and the BIW senior officers all participated by constantly working to get the authorization for that Phase 1. Special recognition goes to Greg Lane, BIW's Executive Vice President, and his staff for their persistence and collaboration with other partners. You know, it's not very often that organized labor and the private sector agree, but it was a unanimous decision that construction and housing are essential in Washington and that we needed to get back to work in a safe manner. And thank you to everyone for that incredible unity and support of our housing industry. This has been an incredibly difficult month for all of us, the members, the leadership, BIW staff, and our local associations. We celebrate that ability to return to work under Phase 1 guidelines, but let me stress that we still have a lot of challenges ahead of us. Work continues on Phase 2 and the ability to open new projects. Throughout this trying episode, the leadership and the staff at BIW have been working tirelessly to educate Governor Inslee about how our industry can keep employees and the public safe, while continuing to produce housing so needed in our state, to keep people employed and off unemployment, and to support the state's economy. We also now have a huge responsibility to follow the procedures as outlined to protect ourselves, our workers, our loved ones, and our communities. This is not time to do business as usual or to take any shortcuts. Our health and also the success in paving the way for other industries to find safe solutions to return to work depends on our vigilance. And that vigilance is really, really important because if we do not follow those guidelines, the governor can also shut us down again. So now it's up to you. Today's webinar will help you learn exactly what Phase 1 construction means, the on-site requirements, and the new safety precautions. I'd like to introduce Greg Lane, BIW's Executive Vice President, to start with an overview of today's program. Greg?
Thank you, Sherry. And I really want to thank all of the senior officers and the leadership at BIW. You guys participated wholly and completely in this work over the last few weeks to get to this point, and so we appreciate all of your help and support. This really was a team effort between BIW staff, the leadership, the member leadership at BIW, and all the local associations were actively involved in this advocacy effort to get us to this point. And it is a great accomplishment for the association, but it was truly a collective effort. So we were pleased to get to this point, and I'm really excited to kind of walk through the requirements and help everybody understand and be able to comply as quickly as possible to get onto the job site as quickly as possible. That was the goal and the focus of all of our efforts here over the last month, was to get you all back out on the job site, and we're really pleased that at least this first step is underway. So welcome to this webinar. You are benefiting today, the folks who are attending today, because we did this on Saturday. So we had kind of a dry run on Saturday, had a few hundred people listening and watching, and now we're doing it a second time. And so we've had a little practice run. Hopefully we'll be a little better at it this time around. But we're really pleased to have everybody with us. The format that we're going to use today, we have 3 presentations we're going to give. I'm going to first walk through the Phase 1 job requirements that accompany the governor's order, and we'll discuss those in detail, try and clarify a few things that we've heard come up from members over the last few days. And then Joseph Irons, who's one of our senior officers, a remodeler in King County, Iron Brothers Construction, is going to do the second part of the presentation today, and he's going to walk you through some real life examples. How do you take these new requirements and apply them to your business on your job site? And Joseph's and his company have been doing that very successfully and have some great examples to be able to show you, and he can talk you through how they've navigated that. And then finally, Jackson Maynard, who is the general counsel at BIW, is going to talk a little bit about enforcement and some of the kind of most frequently asked questions we've had in terms of enforcement. And we'll spend about an hour and a half. So we hope to wrap up around 5 o'clock. After each presentation, there will be a time for questions. So after I get finished with my talk, we will answer questions, and same thing with Joseph and Jackson at the end of each period, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So how do you ask questions? We've got almost 300 people with us, a little more than 250, I guess. And so we can't just open it up. So we've created a process for you to ask questions while the presentations are taking place. And the way you do that is you go down to the chat box, and what we'd like you to do is select Hannah Markley in the chat box and send Hannah your questions. And you can send your questions during the presentation. And then when we're done, Hannah will actually kind of facilitate asking those questions. She'll be going through and picking and choosing which topics kind of are most requested, and then ask questions, and then the speakers will address them. So we will have a question and answer session at the end of each presentation before we move on to the next speaker. If there is time at the end, and we'll try and get to some of the questions maybe that we didn't get to as well. We will also be keeping a record of all the questions and who is asking them, and we will, over the next couple days, send you an email. If we did not get to your question on the presentation, we'll send you an email with an answer to your question as well. So if it doesn't get addressed during the webinar, don't fret. We will get you an answer over the next couple days, and we'll put up some contact information at the end of the session as well, so that if you have questions that come up over the next couple days, you can email and get a hold of us about that as well. So I'm going to start by walking you through the new job site requirements under phase 1. I had the privilege of representing BIW on the construction working group that the governor put together to negotiate, I guess, these new requirements. So I worked with a couple other members from the business community, one from AGC, the Association of General Contractors, and AWB, Association of Washington Business. And then we had representatives from 3 labor unions that were also part of the group. And then we also had everything reviewed and commented on by the Department of Labor and Industries, the Department of Health, and then, of course, the governor's office as well. So this is a product that was arrived at collectively between all the interests of those organizations. And my goal in entering it was, one, to try and get you all back to work as quickly as we could, but in the requirements to try and give you as much flexibility as possible to work within them to be able to comply quickly and as easily as possible. In some cases, we accomplished that more than others, and I'll walk through some of that. There are some things in here that I wish were a little different, but it was a negotiation, and this is where we ended up and had to be in order to get the governor to adopt phase 1. So what is phase 1? What does low risk construction mean? What is authorized under phase 1? There are 2 primary definitions that go into what is low risk. The first is that it is defined by work, not by project, and that can be a little difficult to kind of grasp if you think about it just as a project. But what we really did is we focused on what the work was. What is the safety risk associated with the work as the definition, and not project by project. And so in this case, low risk is defined by any activity that that does not require workers to be closer than 6 feet together. So it doesn't matter what the work is, it doesn't matter what the activity is. If you can do it maintaining 6 foot social distancing, it is allowed to be done under phase 1 low risk construction. If the work requires that you have to be closer than 6 feet, it is not considered low risk, and it's not authorized under phase 1. So that's the clear delineation. If the work can be done, keeping workers farther than 6 feet or farther apart, it can be done. If not, it can't be done. The other piece of the definition is it only applies to existing construction projects. So you can't start new projects. What does existing mean? That's been a question that's been asked quite a bit over the last few days, and it is somewhat broad. And the way the governor's office is going to allow the definition to be is they're going to leave it up to local jurisdictions to define what existing is. So each local entity, city or county, can come up with what that definition is. We hope, and what we're pressing for, is that local jurisdictions will define it as if a permit was approved prior to the stay-at-home order, it should be considered an existing construction project. In some cases, jurisdictions are defining it a little more tightly, where they're requiring some work to have taken place on the job site in order for it to be existing. In some cases, we've actually heard it's being defined a little more broadly, where if you've applied for a permit prior to the stay-at-home order, then they would consider it existing. In any of those 3 cases, the governor is not going to step in and correct or require change from the local jurisdiction. They will accept any of those as the definition and are leaving that discretion up to the local entity. So you need to check with your local planning department as to exactly how they are going to define existing construction. But that is what phase 1 is about. Existing construction projects where work can be done, any work that that can be done keeping workers at least 6 feet apart. So what are some of the requirements associated with complying? The first requirement is that every site needs to have a comprehensive COVID-19 exposure control mitigation and recovery plan. We're calling this a site safety plan. Every single site has to have a customized site safety plan for that site. And the safety plan has to include all these different things in it. Now, BIW has put together a template for this plan that you can download, which covers all of these items, and it provides sections of it that can be customized for your business and for your job site. So if you go to the BIW website and you scroll down and you hit the Return to Work Safely job page, our job safety page, you can download that job site safety plan right here. It brings up a template in Word document that you can, everything that is highlighted can be customized, but we've included all the policies that are required. We've included everything that you need in order to comply with the job site requirement plans. You just need to customize it and have it available at each job site. Now, you don't need to post it on every job site, but you do need to have it available for inspection, right here, available for inspection by any state or local authority when they ask. So it just has to be available on the job site. So that's the first requirement. The second one is a posting requirement. So in some cases, you have to post some things on the job site, and others you just have to make sure you're in compliance with some sort of employee requirement. But in this case, the second one is a job posting requirement. You have to post on each job site signed written notice about what work you plan to do under phase 1. So you can list it daily and change it if you'd like, or you can just put everything on there that you plan to do over the next few weeks on the job site. It doesn't matter, but you do have to write that out and post it so that that is visible to the public and regulators. We also have a template for you to be able to do that. It's available right here, the written notice to workers and subcontractors. So if you open that, that's a Word document, and you can use that as your template to be in compliance with that requirement. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to get into some of the enumerated requirements here. The first one is that a site supervisor, a COVID-19 site supervisor, has to be designated by every contractor for every job site. Now, this does not need to be a brand new hire. It can be somebody you already have on staff. They just have to be designated as the supervisor, and they have to be very familiar with the site safety plan and the requirements. So they need to spend some time getting educated about that. But you just need to have a site safety supervisor for every contractor that's designated. The site supervisor does not have to be on site unless there are 7 or more people on the job site at one time. If there are 7 or more people, so if there's 6 and fewer, you don't need to have them on the site. If there are 7 or more people, a site supervisor has to be on the job site. Now, this again does not have to be an 8th person, doesn't have to be an extra person that is the site supervisor. You can designate one of those 7 people on a work crew to be the site supervisor for the day. You just have to have somebody designated to be in that role, and that site supervisor is in charge of understanding the requirements and monitoring and making sure that employees are complying on the job site. That is the role of the job site supervisor. So again, this is not something that you have to hire somebody new for to be in compliance with this. It can be somebody already on staff, or it can be, it can change daily even. It just have to have somebody designated, named and designated on the job site if there are 7 or more people. The next requirement is safety training. Every employee needs to have an initial safety training about COVID-19 before they enter the job site. So as you restart things with your employees, on that first day, you need to have an initial training with them. And then you need to have a weekly training associated with COVID-19 after that. Now we have put together a training, a toolkit for you for that first training session. So you can download this on the from the BIAW website and utilize it for that first training session. And I would keep it with you or keep it near the site, because every new employee, as you have different subs coming on the site, needs to be briefed about that first training when they come onto the site. And then that the safety requirements document, this document right here, has to be posted on the job site as well. So that's another posting requirement. Then we get into social distancing. We've already talked about this. So you need to make sure that at all times, everybody on the job site maintains at least 6 feet of separation while they're working. There are exceptions for, very minimum passing, situations where they pass by each other. So if they have to go down a hallway and pass by each other, you can have minimal exceptions for that. But when they're on the job site working, they need to make sure, whether it's they're working or at breaks or lunch or during your safety talks, at all times, that they maintain that 6 foot of separation. It's a good idea in your site safety plan to go identify those points where people might congregate and make sure that the site supervisor knows that, and that employees are aware of those areas to avoid them as kind of a best practice. But you need to ensure that all employees are maintaining that 6 foot of separation at all time. Another kind of practical way to help accomplish this is to make sure you schedule maybe only one trade or subcontractor, depending on the size of their crews, on a site at one time may be helpful in maintaining this as well. It also might be helpful in keeping less than 7 people on the job site at one time, so you don't have to worry about the site supervisor requirement, but that is one way that you can accomplish it. That's not a requirement that you only have one trade or subcontractor, but it is kind of a best practice suggestion recommended. In terms of PPE, and this is a big issue, it's one that there's a lot of confusion out there about, so I really want to kind of address and help clarify some things here. So in terms of PPE, employees are required to wear gloves at all times on the job site. They're required to wear eye protection at all times on the job site, and they're required to wear a face covering at all times on the job site. Now, we call it face masks here, but if you get into the Department of Labor Industries and Department of Health rules for masks, all that is required is some sort of cloth face covering. And Joseph's going to have a number of those kind of examples for you, but during his presentation. But it can be the homemade cloth masks. It can be even a bandana. Those all comply with the requirement. You don't have to go out and buy specialty masks. You can even use dust masks if you've got those just as part of your regular equipment. That can also comply. So any sort of cloth facial covering would put you in compliance, but employees have to wear it at all times on the job site. In terms of gloves, they also have to wear gloves at all times on the job site. Obviously, in most cases, they're wearing work gloves, but in those cases where gloves are not required, they have to wear a different type of glove. It can either be a simple latex glove if they want. But a glove of some type has to be worn on the job site at all times. And PPP is absolutely required, or this PPE is absolutely required and will be monitored by L&I. And if you're not in compliance, it is one of the issues that they can use to shut your work site down. So be aware of that. Sanitation and cleanliness. I'll point out a couple issues here. The first is that you need to provide a hand washing station on every job site. And this is a very important requirement because washing your hands frequently is a best practice to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So that's why this requirement's in here. But you have to have a hand washing station on every site available to employees at all times to be able to wash their hands. If there is running water available, it has to utilize that running water on the job site. If running water is not available, you need to fashion some sort of portable washing station with a supply of water. And soap always has to be available as well with the running water. So it has to have soap and water, either running water or a source of water as a portable standalone hand washing station. But you have to have a hand washing station with water on every site. Now, you can also have hand sanitizer available, and employees can use hand sanitizer. However, you cannot have only hand sanitizer. It cannot be a replacement for having the washing station. You can have hand sanitizer as an addition, and employees can use it, but it cannot replace, or it doesn't work as a replacement for the requirement. You need to have a portable hand washing station. You also have to post, again, visible to employees in that list of all the posting requirements, the kind of best practice hygienic practices. We have a sample of that available on the website here that you can download and post. So we've got that available for you. You can access that directly. You don't have to go search for it yourself. It's directly from the CDC. You also have to clean surfaces and areas that are frequented by workers. So you need to, if they have doorknobs or handrails or other countertops and things that they're touching, high touch surfaces on job sites need to be cleaned frequently. So you need to have cleaning solution. You need to have a process in place, which by the way is laid out very clearly in the job site safety template that we provide for you, but you just need to follow it and make sure that you're cleaning those areas on a regular basis. I want to point out point 20 here, because this gets into making sure in remodeling situations, if you're doing work in an occupied home, you need to make sure that you're sanitizing job sites when you get there, because those in the home might have been on in those areas while you weren't there. You need to sanitize them after you or before you leave, because again, folks who live in the house may end up in those areas. And it is a requirement that any occupants of the home stay at least 10 feet away from you and your employees. And that's because there are no PPE requirements for those occupants. So they don't have to wear masks or the other PPE that's required. And so they need to maintain it even further than that 6 foot distance. So the 10-foot distance is what's required. So that's what needs to happen when you are doing remodels in occupied homes. There are a number of policies dealing with what to do with employees who have symptoms. Either they come down with symptoms on the job, or they develop symptoms at home, or they have a family member that develops symptoms at home. Those are all those policies that are required in this document are laid out in the site safety plan. So I'm not going to go through them in detail here, but I do want to point out a couple things. The first one is a requirement that was dropped in late in the process is that all employees need to have their temperature taken at the beginning of each shift before they come on the job site, and they need to be screened and asked if they have any of the symptoms that are associated with COVID-19. You have to do that every day, every morning before they enter the job site. This was one that was, as I said, kind of dropped on us at the end, and was a bit frustrating, frankly, that it was added so late in the process. But it was a requirement that the governor insisted on having in right at the last minute before he would approve phase 1. So the thermometers do not have to be no touch. It's recommended that you use a no touch or no contact thermometer, but it's really hard to get those at the moment. And so if you can't find one, you can use an oral thermometer. You just have to make sure that it's sanitized after each use. So kind of a best practice on this is that you set up a station on your job site, workers come on, you put the thermometer and a sanitizing wipes or spray bottle on a table. You stand 6 feet away, you have the employee come up, take their temperature, report their temperature, you ask them the questions about the symptoms. They sanitize the thermometer, leave it for the next employee, and you just kind of repeat that process every morning. If a worker reports a temperature of 104 degrees or higher, they are considered to have a fever that is associated with COVID, and they need to be sent home. If they answer yes to any of the symptoms that you ask about associated with COVID, then they need to be sent home. They cannot enter the job site. So that screening needs to take place every day at the morning before the job site or before the workday begins. All of these other requirements are spelled out in the site safety plan that we have. There's a couple things that I wanted to point out. One is if you have an employee who wants to go home for any reason, they just don't feel comfortable on the job site, they don't feel safe, you have to allow them to leave, and you need to follow all the leave requirements associated with COVID. So if an employee, for whatever reason, doesn't think it's safe to be on the site, they have that option to remove themselves, and you cannot take action against them. You got to follow all the rules associated with that. Another question that people have been asking about is the quarantine requirement. If you have any workers that come from out of state, they have to be self-quarantined for 14 days upon their arrival in the state before they can come to your job site. However, that does not apply to states that are contiguous to Washington. So Oregon and Idaho are exempted from that requirement. If a worker comes from any other state, they need to do the quarantine. But if they come from Oregon or Idaho, that's not required. The last requirement that I want to mention is you need to keep a daily attendance log of every worker and visitor that comes on to the job site, and that log needs to include their name, their phone number, and contact information. We have also a sample available that you can use, download and use, available at the website, so very quick and easy, you can grab that. But you do need to keep an attendance log of everyone who comes onto the site, and you need to retain that for 4 weeks. And the reason for this is if you had a worker or someone else who came to the job site who develops COVID-19 as confirmed case, you're required by the Department of Health and working with the local health department to notify everyone that they've come in contact with the previous 72 hours. So you need to have that contact information, and you need to retain it so that if that happens, those folks can be contacted, and that's the reason for this requirement. You need to comply with all of these before you start work again, and that's really important. So you need to accommodate for all of this, have a site safety plan in place, get all the required PPE, make sure you've got a washing station. Everything needs to be in place before you can start your project. So you got to keep that in mind. In terms of enforcement, the enforcement of all of these requirements falls to the Department of Labor and Industries. Local jurisdictions, local planning departments and things are not able to enforce this. They can be reporters, however, so remember that. They come on the site and they can be a reporter to L&I, but L&I is the enforcement authority for everything required in phase 1. And also I will make you aware that we tried to put an end date on these requirements, and we put it in the document that these requirements are only in place as long as the stay home, stay healthy order, the governor's proclamation, is in effect. Now, as you all know, it's supposed to run through May 4th currently. It is likely, highly likely, that it's going to be extended well into May, or maybe even into the first part of June, sometime over the next few days. So these requirements will be in place as long as that order is in effect, or unless L&I or some other federal agency or something adopts them as permanent regulations. We are going to work to try and prevent that from happening, but at least as long as the stay-at-home order is in place, you have to comply. So that kind of covers what some of the highlights of the requirements and addresses some of the questions that we've been hearing over the last few days. But Hannah, I'm going to now ask you to, or turn it over to you to start asking some questions that might have come up from the group.
Okay, so the first recurring issue is the temperature taking. Does the general contractor or whomever our employer need to take visitors' temperatures? And also, when a employer employs people who go from site to site, such as plumbers or electricians, and they're on multiple job sites, does the requirement mean that they need to take their temperature on each new job site, or is taking it at the beginning of the day sufficient?
Taking it at the beginning of the day is sufficient. So if they move from job site to job site, that's fine, as long as it's been taken at the beginning of the day. You do not need to take the temperature of visitors. You're only required to take it of the employees on the site. And the other issue that I didn't mention that there might be a question around is you are not required to keep a log of this information either. So you just have to have a procedure and a practice in place to do the screening, taking the temperature and asking the question about symptoms at the start of every day, and you're in compliance.
Okay, and does the temperature taking requirement apply when you have less than 7 people?
Yes, temperature taking is required of any employee at the beginning of the day before they start the day. So yeah, there's no exemption for less, and if it's only 1 or 2 people on the job site, you still have to do the screening.
If it's only 1 person on the job site, would you also still need to have the same PPE requirements and all of the other requirements you have?
You do. There is no exception for just a single person on the job site, and at least in this document. I do think in conversations with L&I that as they put together their enforcement guidance, that they might try and add in some flexibility for that and accommodate for that. But as of now, there's no exception, and all the PPE rules apply, even if it's just 1 person there. I know the thinking, at least from the Department of Health's point of view, was that even if it's only 1 person working on the job site, there might be other people that visit the job site, whether it's a delivery that takes place or some other visitor onto the site. And so that's the reasoning behind it.
For subcontractors or suppliers or even office staff for construction companies, what requirements from the phase 1 requirement list and from the documents that BIW created apply?
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Yeah, so for production and manufacturing companies that supply construction
yes.
or staffing in an office environment for
Right.
construction companies, or even subcontractors such as plumbers or electricians,
Right.
which of these apply to them, and should they create their own job site safety plans or rely on the generals?
Right. Okay, so those are a lot of different groups of people. Let's first start with the office staff. Office staff is authorized to go back to work under this order as well. So if your company has administrative staff, you've got a home office that they work out of, they can go back to work. They have to comply with a different set of requirements. However, L&I has a best practice and list of requirements for office environments, and that's what covers those staff. We've been sending out that separate list of requirements to folks, and we can make that available for people to download. So that takes care of the office staff. In terms of suppliers, these requirements do apply to suppliers, and they have to do the screening of employees, they have to do PPE, all of that. They're pretty much under the same requirements as workers on the job site. And then, and it's no different either for a sub or a general. Now, the way it'll work on a job site is there's one site safety plan for every job site. So a sub, if the general contractor has the site safety plan, the sub doesn't need to have one as well. However, every employer is responsible for their own employees when it comes to those requirements. So when it comes to making sure PPE is provided, when it comes to doing the training sessions, when it comes to mandating social distancing, you're responsible for your own employees, but the general contractor is responsible for the overall compliance of the site. So as a general contractor, you need to monitor and make sure subs are meeting the requirements for their employees, though you may not be directly responsible for compliance of the employees. But Ellen, I will have an expectation that the general is ensuring overall accountability. So, I mean, generals and subs need to talk this through. That you need to come up with a plan as to exactly how this is going to work, exactly which responsibility is going to fall on whom, to make sure that the site in general is in compliance at all times.
I think one thing a lot of people have asked about as well is the porta potty requirements and the hand washing station in a porta potty as well. Is that a sufficient hand washing station?
If it has running water and soap, yes. So it depends on the type of porta potty. If you've got just the standalone single units, very few of those that I've seen have running water and soap in them. If you have the kind of larger trailer units that have running water and everything, then it would comply. So the requirements for the hand washing station is that it have water and soap. And so you've got to make sure it has that. Otherwise, it has to be separate of the porta potty. In terms of the porta potties, the cleaning requirements, we actually did have some language in our current site safety plan, which was a little more explicit in its instruction than necessary, and we're going to broaden that a little bit to loosen it up and provide some flexibility. We'll have that up here pretty soon. I think we had it in there that they had to be serviced twice a week and cleaned at least twice a day. That was a little more explicit than what the rule actually states, and so we think you can be a little more lax on that and still be in compliance. So we're going to loosen up that language in the site safety plan, and that should be up momentarily.
Great. Another question that I've seen a few times is about lifting heavy objects. any number of heavy objects when you have to stand closer than 6 feet together to lift them? Is that permissible?
Unfortunately, no, there's no exception. So if again, this is designed to be only work that can be done accommodating the 6 feet. So if it's lifting something, if it's installing a stove or installing a countertop, that's granite countertop that's too heavy and needs 2 people working closer than 6 feet, it cannot be done under phase 1. Now there will be a phase 2, which that work will be authorized, probably with some additional safety requirements. Our working group is in the process of finalizing phase 2. In fact, we're meeting right after this seminar today to have some more discussions about that. I think we will have a final phase 2 document that we send to the governor here in the next couple days, and then we will be encouraging him to adopt phase 2 as quickly as possible to open up all of that other work. But under phase 1, if you cannot accommodate it, maintaining 6 foot of social distancing, you cannot do it.
What about workers who live together in the same household? Are they allowed to be closer than 6 feet?
Not on the job site. So there is no exception for family or folks who live together. You can carpool to the job site together, though we would discourage that. Carpooling with other employees, and you certainly cannot carpool in company vehicles or on company time. That's prohibited. But in terms of the job site, there's no exception. So if 2 people, family members, or they live together, carpool to the job site, they have to maintain 6 feet of social distancing while on the site itself and comply with all the PPE requirements.
For the eye mask or the eye protection and mask requirements, would a face shield satisfy both of those together?
I'm asking clarification from L&I for that. My understanding, well, certainly under the requirements the way they're written right now, no, it would not. It could, the face shield would satisfy the eye protection, but not the mask. I'm asking L&I about that. We'll see as they put together their guidance as to whether or not they will deem that acceptable for a mask. But my understanding in terms of best practices is that it does not replace a mask. So it can be for eye protection, but not for the facial covering.
Okay, and I guess the last big picture question is how these new phase 1 requirements affect work that was allowed as an essential business prior.
Great. So any work that was deemed essential does have to comply with these new rules. So they have to incorporate them into the work. However, the 6 foot restriction does not apply. So you are still exempted as an essential job, and you are able to do work within 6 feet. So that's the one difference. There's one additional requirement. So in those cases where you're doing essential work, or you're doing an essential project that has work where folks will be working closer than 6 feet together, you have to do a site hazard plan. And so there's that additional step that you'll have to take. But in terms of being able to do the work, you can still do it if the project either was deemed essential or is deemed essential moving forward. So there is that.
I think those are the major things.
Okay.
And there's a few examples we'll have to get to individually.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so next we will turn it over to Joseph Irons. Joseph is with Iron Brothers in Construction up in the North King County area, and is one of our BIW senior officers. He's the treasurer this year, going through the chairs, and really pleased that he can be with us. So Joseph, take it away.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having us. I definitely want to thank you and Sherry for the leadership to get us to the point we're at. My wife keeps reminding me it's a privilege that we are working right now and we're the first industry to get back. So thank you guys for your leadership. I also have to thank her for helping me put this presentation together, and her being a retired surgery room nurse definitely brought a medical perspective when we wrote our plan. And we've been writing our plan 6 weeks ago before it started happening, because we've been essential workers. We've carried on essential projects throughout this, which is great to hear that we can still keep those projects moving within 6 feet as far as moving appliances in for the kitchens we're working on. Also have to thank my team, because I couldn't do this without them. Our production manager and all our project managers in the field and carpenters are being role models and leaders, making sure we are complying. Again, it's a privilege that we are working, and we want to make sure we're following this plan. And Cody Ross, who's one of our senior project managers, keeps reminding us that, what did he say here? He said, our leadership and staff are comfortable with something called disturbed operations, where the only communication may be through radio. He was a Marine for 10 years, or still a Marine, so he's used to combat situations and getting out there. And I bring that up because we have a well-trained staff, and if you don't have staff that are going to be implementing your safety policies and rules, you shouldn't be out there working, because you're going to make it bad for the rest of our industry. So I'll just show some of the stuff we've done as far as Irons Brothers Construction. I think I will. Let's see if my PowerPoint works. There we go. The plan needs to be specific to your company, projects, needs, and risks, as well as what staff you have and what they're capable of doing. BIW has a lot of resources and templates, so when you're writing your plan, go to BIW, look at what they have. I've also belonged to the Master Builders Associated King and Snohomish County. They have a lot of resources on their pages. Between your local home builders associate and BIW, you should be able to get the template in place that will help you write a plan. And if you start writing it and you can't comply with it, that's your step to go. Phase 1 is not for me, and I need to step back and wait for the stay-home order to be lifted. Again, today I'll review parts of my plan. Our goal in our plan is always safety first, and that's been the plan since day one. If we can't provide a safe work environment, we don't want to be there. That's not good for us, our clients, our community. Again, prevention and control of COVID-19 was the key of what we're doing. Sherry Schwab, who you heard from, keeps reminding everyone this is not business as usual. There are lots of changes, and we need to comply with them. The phase 1 plan, again, will not work for everybody. I'll show you some of the things that I've implemented. We're a custom builder out of Shoreline. We do a lot of custom remodels, ground up, very large projects, and we were able to implement this because of the training our team already had. Again, follow the rules. The rules are there they're not just guidelines, they're rules. If you don't follow these rules, L&I will come down on you. I put on there 6 Ps. So I've learned a long time ago the 6 Ps, which is prior proper planning prevents poor performance. So the more you can plan, the better you're going to be able to perform on your job. So the governor gave us, this actually stole from the My Edmonds News, one of the slides from the governor's office. They said we can return to work as long as we can maintain the 6 feet, like Greg said. We have that comprehensive COVID-19 exposure control and mitigation plan. Again, BIW has templates for that. We have that posted and written on the job site for all the employees, subcontractors, and government officials, and we keep a safe and healthy work site. We are doing that, so we can comply. Not all of our projects we can open up right now, and we've been practicing essential sites for 6 weeks now, and not all of our jobs we're able to start and be ready for. So I just want to give a little word of caution out there. Your plan should include monitoring the employee's health, reporting the cases of COVID-19, and the post-exposure and follow-up of planning. BIW has great toolbox talks. Here's a link to their website, and this is on their website. This is actually from this morning's meeting we had. We had a virtual safety meeting with all of our team. And again, that's this morning. Zoom has been amazing. The platform we're on to be able to do these virtual meetings. We've done job walks with some of those clients on the essential jobs via Zoom. We have one person on site walking a job while our staff, not our staff, the clients are at work Zooming in remotely or Zooming in from another location. As Greg said, clients cannot be within 10 feet of our workers. We do a lot of barriers. I'll show later how to help plan for that. Also on these toolbox talks, we used to have people sign in. Now we just have the person running the meeting sign in who's all there. It's pretty easy when you have a Zoom call, you can see who's participating. A lot of this safety stuff is not new. This is a page from Safety Sally of our coloring book we put out in 2016. And you can see here, we show a mask on, we show eye protection on her, we show gloves, Those are the basic requirements to be on site, is some sort of facial covering, gloves, and masks, and we'll get into that more later. But most of the stuff, you're used to dealing with harsh environments. Construction, I would say, works in hazardous and dangerous environments. We all do every day. Our team is very well trained with OSHA 10, CPR first aid, healthy homes training. They've done a lot of training to be able to work in hazardous and dangerous environments. Picture on the right, just shows snow. I mean, we're used to working in the snow as well. If some big storm comes through, we're gonna address our site safety plan so we can meet those needs and provide a safe working environment to get the job done. Implementing your plan, again, there's lots of digital platforms out there. We've been using Zoom because it allows us to do that 6-foot social distancing. We've been doing a lot of trainings these past few weeks when most of our staff have not been on site because it's not feasible to have that many people on site and perform the 6-foot, essential or not. And there's Facebook, Microsoft Teams, Blue Jeans, Adobe Connect. There's lots of platforms out there, Facebook Messenger. So see what works for you. I believe Google Duo is some of the inspectors are liking to do inspections on as well. And we've done digital inspections, which is great. I think hopefully it'll be more efficient in the future that we can do more of these digital inspections when inspectors can't get on site. Again, all visitors, although Greg said some visitors don't need to sign on log, we have anyone that's going to go on our site signing in on a log, from delivery people, subcontractors, inspectors, homeowners. We have not had an inspector on site because they've been doing video inspections. Sanitation, if anything is used, tools, you should not be sharing tools, like Greg said. Any high-touch areas should be disinfected. We started that, I think, before the order went in effect. We bought lots of hand sanitizers, paper towels, so they're disposable. The picture on the right is actually a sink that we had on one of our job sites as a temporary kitchen sink for them to wash their dishes while we were doing a kitchen remodel. So putting temporary sinks on site for us was not anything new, but we don't want to share that sink with the homeowner. So our hand washing station is separate than that. But you definitely want to clean and disinfect high touch areas. Matt Plancis, our production manager, on a webinar with the roofers earlier, how they're getting back to work, and they had concerns about ladders and high touch. I assume if you have gloves on, that's fine, but I would say on sites you always have to have gloves on. Here's a couple examples of some sinks that we put in place. We made, I think, 6 of them, 4 sites to get on there. So I'll go to another slide. This is just a quick example how we did it. Just a laundry tub, plugged one side on the back, put a hose up and a connection there. And below there's a bucket. You can't see my mouse on it. Oh, you can, maybe a little bit. But this connection in the middle is just an adapter so it can go from a garden hose. One question they had, is it tepid water? We haven't had any complaints. If we have a complaint about the water temperature, we will wrap an electrical line around it and plug it in like we would on a frost thermal pipe to make sure it is tepid. We're looking into that now to make sure that we are complying with everything. And the water goes in a bucket you can dispose of. In King County, they told us we could do it on site because it's minimal. I got that from King County Solid Waste. But you can also put it down a drain if you have to. Again, these are at the entrances of sites. So every site of ours has a different entrance, whether it's from the back or the side or the front door. Whatever entrance everyone's walking in is where these wash stations need to be so people can use them. There's other options of wash stations. The one on the left here was provided by a friend of mine, Sarah Henry at Gasper Construction. They use these on their sites right now. They fabricated a paper towel holder, the soap holder, and then a foot pump. And the one on the right is a very similar model. Doesn't matter how you create them, you just need to have abundant amount of water and soap on site for these stations. Here's another one where it has side tables. I don't know if you're doing dishes on site, but this allows a lot more washing. That's a little more than we needed for our sites and space, but if you have it and that's what you need, there's lots of options. This is on the left. My wife actually went and got her doggy a treat over the weekend. So when we're calling like this, they're able to be quiet as we're on these Zoom calls with those treats. But if she walked in, this was just a temporary station they had set up for people. And that looks feasible. I don't know where they got it. The one on the right is just one of our office bathrooms. So in the office, we have to provide that sanitation too. In our office, we used to have terry cloth towels, nice and fancy. Now we have paper towels because they're disposable, more sanitary. So, and that faucet's also a touchless faucet. So there's less risk of people touching things. They still have to touch a door handle on the way out, as you see in the reflection. but they can use a paper towel for that and throw it. And on this mirror there, you can see we have our clean wash instructions. And there's a lot of different washing instructions out there you can post. Just post something that people can see and easily to read. Here's other sanitation options. There's a wash cube here. These are over $1,000 on the right. Bottom left are a few $100 from IKEA. There's lots of options out there. Job containment and cleanliness. I believe when we're on a job site, the tighter we can make our area to work in, I shouldn't say tighter, but the more we can remove the homeowner occupant from it or other visitors, the safer and more practical we can be. So here's just some examples of ballooning off sites. These are all examples we were doing before and during this to minimize the risk of dust and other exposures throughout the work site. A lot of this comes from our staff are EPA lead certified trained for dealing with lead RRP rule on site. So another thing, just have a clean work environment that people can get around, organized. The bottom right here again shows that the exit is coming in and we're separating the work. So the homeowners have their own space. And then we don't, as far as I know, as long as we have that plastic wall up, we don't need that 10 foot of separation. So the more we can separate that area, the easier it is for us to keep working. Again, our goal is to manage the risks to the most practical extent possible to maximize efficiency. We're all here to be as efficient as we can, and putting these walls up front makes us a lot more efficient. We've already been using lots of mechanical means to maximize safety on site. From the bottom left, we bought a couple more of these HEPA negative air machines, air scrubbers. The top left there, to comply with silica, we had HEPA vacuums and jackhammers. So when we're breaking out, we're dealing with that. So infectious disease is just another way that we've been planning for, just didn't know it with some of this equipment. These things here are not required, but for us, it makes a safer environment. So we've been putting them in place so our staff, our clients, any visitors have a safer work environment to walk into. Worker feels sick, like Greg said, they need to be reported and that area should be disinfected immediately. When working occupied home, again, that 10 feet area we need to maintain. Workers are encouraged to stay home if they feel sick. If someone tells us they're sick, they're not coming to our job site. And our team is empowered to say, no, we need to stop. We're not having anyone on site, because that's just going to trickle down and have a safety concern for everyone. And we don't want to shut down our company because someone's sick. It says during a shift, someone has respiratory issues. Again, they need to report them to the supervisor immediately. If their family members have it, they need to report that as well. We had it that they need to self-identify symptoms of fever, cough, shortness of breath before, during, and mid-shift. But our project manager is responsible for, which in our case, the site supervisor requirement is our project manager. So they're required to discuss that with the trade before they go on site, that they did check their temperature and they don't have a temperature and they don't have any of these symptoms. We did purchase thermometers, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But it says a worker has any conditions, they have to be 72 hours free of them without use of medication before returning to work. If they believe the work site's not safe, they can remove themselves, and they need to notify their supervisor immediately, because if they're saying it's not safe, we want to know as a company what wasn't safe so we can address it and fix it. Fail to comply with our plan, they will be immediately removed from the job site. For us, it's not a gray area, it's black and white, and we want to make sure we're doing everything correct. The workers confirmed to be positive, they need to report that to the supervisor also, so we can notify the fellow workers and exposure and maintain that confidentiality as much as we can there. Temperature information was just added Friday. We bought similar ones to the ones on the left here, and in the center are these probe covers to be sanitary. But with us, we bought enough thermometers that every staff can have their own, and we have one for every job site. If somebody comes on the job site and they didn't take their temperature and say, no, I didn't take it this morning, well, here's a thermometer, take it. They take it at home and tell us that they were under, we're gonna believe them and let them keep working. If they say they didn't, they're gonna be taking a temperature. They need to self-regulate it. We don't wanna share thermometers, so that's why we got our staff, one for everyone to share. And the site supervisor will be telling anyone on site that they can, if they didn't take their temperature ahead of time, they're gonna have to take it on site before they work. You need a site supervisor. Here's my youngest daughter posing yesterday with a nice hard hat on, safety glasses. That bandana also deals as a face cover, and she has gloves on. But the site supervisor on the project is only required if you have more than 7 people. we automatically named our project managers, site supervisors, so they can manage the job. With the case of our essential projects, some of our staff were not coming to work because they had homeschooling and they were not unable to work. So that case, we were able to name someone else to take on those activities. As our essential jobs are going, we put a big sign, well, not a big sign, 8.5 by 11 on our yard sign, notifying the neighbors and community that was an approved essential work site per the government Stay Home, Stay Healthy order. And as we've been getting more information, even before phase 1 was about 2 weeks ago, we found the information out as it was publicly announced to the working group, to the governor's office, but he didn't enact it till last Friday, but we wrote our plan based on the latest information we had. So Friday, when we had to start changing it from the implementation, there are very minor changes we had to make. One was a thermometer, other was a daily log we had to input and change. We had a daily log on site, but the job site visitor log we had didn't have someone's contact phone number or email. We just had the company and name and date that they were there. So that's something we had to change. Again, the site supervisor is in charge of that log and responsible to post it. That's a job site log at one of our job sites. Here's another job site log. Again, signage, your company's COVID-19 response plan needs to be posted. We have these job boards at all of our active sites right now. That's a big 6-foot measuring. We haven't pulled that on the floor to measure out yet, but those are what typically we have on site when we're taking as-built photos during site. But 6 feet is not that far apart, and work can get done with 6 feet. Job site signage, here's another site. The front, again, that's our entrance, so that's where our signs are posted. That's where anyone's coming in the house. That's our hand washing station. We have a procedure to enter the construction area zone there. It says they need to call our office to reach a PM. It'll list the name of who's the site supervisor and their phone number there. It also say they need to follow WSHA regulations and appropriate PPE and safety on site. We've been actually doing Zoom meetings with some of our trades in advance. We have some site walks that were coming up that we're talking about how do we sell future jobs and how do we coordinate that. So as we can't enter the home now, we're trying to do virtual Zoom meetings for site walks where we will discuss the project, discuss the photos we have prior, and meet all the trades and let them know what we're expecting of them so they don't show up on site not knowing what they're supposed to be doing. We want to inform them well before they're on site so they don't go and go, oh, I forgot my gloves, I forgot my eyeglasses. Well, you're going to be going home because we're not going to be providing extra stuff. We want to prepare them so they have it. On-site social distancing, I can't say it enough, you need to be 6 feet apart. This sign here was actually from, and there's another one, safetysign.com/COVID-19 safety signs have a lot on their site. We purchased signs over there over the years, and they have a lot of practical signs that can work. These are one of the simplest, easiest ones for me to post. Again, anytime there's more than 2 people on site, you need to have 6 feet of separation. So either of these signs, there's lots of them out there, but something that just shows 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart, people are visual. Minimize any interactions, any deliveries, try to minimize those interactions, not reactions. So you're not conversating more than you have to and maintain that 6 feet of difference. And that distance is with all workers, subcontractors, delivery people, there's no exception, like Greg said. You can be living with someone, could be your family member, going to that job site, you need to maintain that 6 feet apart. And it says only one trade or subcontractor should be on site at a time. That's actually in our plan because we want to encourage the social distancing. The more people we have on site, the more likely we're going to have people crossing over each other. So one trade on site, I think, is best practice. A larger job, if you can maintain more trades, great. You just want to make sure you have the site supervisor if there's more than 7 people on site. PPE is required for jobs that require PPE in the first place. So this is Cody here. He was actually removing some soffits, had some installation there. This is January of 2019. So this is a year and a half ago almost. We can still get the cartridges for these respirators. Our staff all have respirators. So for them to do work that requires it, they're able to get their PPE right now, that at least the refill cartridges at the local Dunn Lumber for us. But they're selling 1 pair per employee per order type of deal. So they're not making sure nobody hoards it. You still have to have appropriate gloves on, face coverings, and mask. And it says no work is authorized without proper PPE. The standard for sites, any face covering actually works. This is a fun one I have. Usually it's when I ride my motorcycle and trying to keep the bugs at my face. But I thought it'd be a fun photo. You still have to have any type of glove needs to be worn. Sorry, if a glove's required, wear the appropriate glove. If there's no glove required, you can wear a latex glove. You can wear any type of glove, but you have to have gloves on at all times and eye protection at all times. Face coverings, there's no eye protection here. These are just some shopping photos. My niece up here is actually a licensed CNA who works with us, runs our safety program. She made some masks for some, friends, family, and obviously those are her kids in the middle up top. She made some little tyke ones too. So they come in all shapes and sizes, these masks. People can make them. Face coverings can be almost anything that covers your face from bandana. And the stores, nicely, some of these stores, the bottom left is a big box store. They have separate lines for contractors and DIY customers, which is nice. I was in one this morning, this one actually, Home Depot, and there wasn't lines at 8 a.m. I was shocked. I think everyone's trying to get their plans in place. The bottom right was at a Joann Fabrics in Shoreline where I walked with our dog, and we went in there with my daughter to get some ribbon as we were making some of these masks. So a lot of people are making masks out there. If you can't find a facial covering, you're not looking hard enough because there's plenty out there. Again, if there's PPE required, you have to wear it for those jobs, but not for just complying. It sounded like Greg said you may have to wear a face mask with a face shield. I thought it was replacement, but sounds like I was wrong. So you have to wear some sort of face covering. That sounds like it'll cover the eye protection. These face shields are pretty readily available on Amazon. They're pretty flimsy. That's a friend of mine, Jennifer. She owns a daycare in Shoreline here, and she wanted her kids to see her face while she had the protection on. But there's bandanas you can put over. They call them rags. I can't think of what biker rags are, like a do-rag that you can pull up also. Anything that covers your face. Remember when you're covering your face though, neighbors, other contractors, other inspectors, media may see that. So make sure you have the appropriate mask on for the image you want to portray at the time, but you can have fun with it. Just make sure you know your audience and where you're working. Again, gloves, eye protection, and facial coverings are key. Whoops. Office splash guards. So we've been operating essential business this whole time, maintaining equipment and servers and everything else. Scarlett up front has a face covering on. We've got her a little shield up front here. This was available from McNamara Signs. We were able to get very quick. We had an existing relationship with them, but that gave her the extra protection as people were dropping off mail, packages, any deliveries, anyone coming into the office. L&I inspectors. So as Greg said, L&I is the one enforcing the plan. I did receive a call from L&I last week saying someone reported us working. And I was like, you're absolutely correct. We are working and we're working on essential jobs. Which one are you talking about? And I went over our plan with him on the phone and he had no concern. He said, it sounds like you're following everything like you're supposed to. Thank you for your time. So the people will call on you. There may be media out there taking photos. Make sure you're practicing the plan. Know your plan. So when they call, you're not guessing like we have a plan. I don't know what it is. You need to know your plan or have the right person to refer to that knows your plan. And that should be the site supervisor. That is what I have now. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so the most common question that we seem to have gotten about how to comply is what to do with wastewater from hand washing and where it is appropriate to use the building. If you're working in a specific building, can you use their sink?
I can answer that. I know that I was going to try to find the email who I spoke to. It doesn't really matter, but King County Solid Waste Disposal, I think is who I spoke to. I have an email, but they said with the minimal amounts, we're allowed to keep it on site and dispose of it there. We didn't have to put it in a drain. What was the other part of the question?
Can you use the sink within the building you're working on as a hand washing station? Like if you're working in a residential remodel?
I wouldn't recommend that unless it was only for the workers to use. We have many sites that have sinks in them, but that is not our choice. We want that separation from the occupant. And we also want it when they enter and exit the job, not just trying to find a room or in a basement or somewhere that's usually not convenient for a hand washing station.
Another question I've gotten a few times is riding together. If you have a two-man crew, can they ride to the work site together?
Greg answered that earlier and said absolutely not. But he said if they were living together, they could carpool, but it goes into effect when they get on site, as far as I recall.
Anna, this goes to just more best practices. If they're certainly if they're on the job, if they're on the clock, traveling in a company vehicle, it's absolutely no. You ultimately you can't make requirements of your workers off time, but best practices would be that they not carpool to the job site even before they start the day on the job. And that's what will be recommended by L&I and strongly encouraged by L&I. So that's the answer. It certainly is a best practice, and they should get in the habit of not doing it.
And I just found the email. So I spoke to Greg Newbern, who's with King County Wastewater Treatment Division. And he told us our new wash stations, with a limited amount of and small quantities, no chemicals, we can dispose of the waste gray water on site. No need to put it in the sewer.
Okay. Another question that's kind of for both of you about temperature taking. How best should those be taken at home or in the office to maintain the 6-foot distance? Because Greg mentioned the employer being responsible for taking those, but Joseph, you mentioned having the employees self-report. Is there a guidance on that?
I'm still working out with L&I exactly about it, and so I don't know exactly. The expectation is that it would be taken on site prior to entering the job site, but there is also a recognition that access to thermometers right now is difficult, very limited, and so some people are implementing a practice of having the employee take it at home and call it in. And I'm waiting on clarification of whether or not L&I long-term will allow that to happen. I think, as a short-term practice where you don't have a thermometer available, to implement something and is fine. But until I get an okay from L&I, I wouldn't count on that as a long-term practice. I think the goal should be to try and do something on site where an employee, you see the employee take it, take the temperature, they report it to you right there, as opposed to having them phone it in. And I'm waiting for more clarification on that.
How often should people change their gloves, Joseph?
Well, I think if they feel it's dirty, they should be changing their gloves. You shouldn't grab a pair of gloves that's soiled throughout your day and then put them on the next day. So at minimum, every shift, every time they take a break, anytime they eat, anytime they use a restroom, they go home. So I mean, a lot of our RRP lead rules trained us there as far as decontaminating, but I would say at minimum when you leave the area. So for us, I would probably suggest taking it off when you leave the work site and get in the car and put a new pair on at the next site. And those are for simple nitro or latex gloves. If you have work gloves, it may be different. You just need to fold them appropriately, put them in a separate bag, and bring them back when you're ready. And the same with the face mask is the same. You want to make sure you have clean mask on. Just because they're a reusable bandana doesn't mean you shouldn't be laundering it and cleaning it. Those should be clean because they were out there and getting dirty all day.
Yeah, the face mat, the face cloth coverings are supposed to be washed each day after use. So wear them for a day, whether you not have a replacement, 2 or 3 that you rotate through, but they should be washed after 1 day.
Okay. For posting the required documents, is having a binder on site with the safety plan sufficient, or does it need to be posted? Or a binder on site with all of the documents sufficient, or does it need to be posted?
For the site safety plan, having it in a binder available upon request satisfies the requirement. However, those requirements that, or the items that have to be posted on site need to be visible to the public at all time, public and employees at all times. So you need to find either putting up a temporary signage where you can put them up and post them, or as Joseph showed in his example, a bulletin board that can be attached to something in the residence, or if you're working in a remodel, or somehow otherwise posted. But those need to be visible to the public and regulars that come in at all times. The site safety plan just upon request.
One clarification, if you're using the BIAW example site safety plan, there's a page that needs to be signed by the company president or executive officer, and that does need to be posted. But the whole plan does not. That page does, though. Okay, so there are several more specific examples, but I think we should probably go ahead and move to Jackson's presentation.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to turn over to Jackson Maynard. He's the general counsel at BIW to talk about enforcement questions. Jackson, there seems to be some problem with your audio. Same issue, same issue.
Greg, I can talk about the thermometers also. We could also do a Zoom call or a messenger call, something with face to see that someone did take the temperature while Jackson's getting his big voice on. But as far as the temperature, I don't know if you actually see them taking it actually does anything, because we're not supposed to know the temperature with employees.
Can you hear me now?
Right? Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you're on, Jackson. I was just going to say, seeing the temperature is not going to tell you what the temperature, oh, you're not supposed to see the temperature. You're still relying on them to tell you it's not above. So that's where we took it, where if they're going to tell us they took the temperature, whether we saw them take it or not, I don't know what the difference is. They can put it in their mouth.
Yeah.
We do have the probe covers 4 hours to keep it sanitary. But I'll get it back to Jackson. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thanks a lot. Can you hear me now? And Greg, can you?
You're good. Go for it.
All right. So as Greg said, I'm general counsel. We've been fielding a lot of these questions. It kind of boils down, though, to basically, you know, there's sort of a short answer to a lot of this. And it basically comes down to thou shalt behave, don't screw this up, and follow these guidelines, or you can risk losing your business license, getting your job site shut down, or potentially facing fines. I mean, that's essentially the short answer to this. I'm going to go into a little longer explanation, but I know we're short on time, so I'll even abbreviate that. Essentially, the governor has said there's 3 ways the order would be enforced. One is via a warning. One is via a regulatory enforcement. So you could face, for instance, the Attorney General doing a Consumer Protection Act violation, which he's done in at least one other instance with a different industry. You could have your license suspended or permits pulled. The governor's mentioned that a number of times in his press conferences. And then the final step is potentially law enforcement getting involved. With this particular list of criteria, however, it does say a number of times in there that L&I is going to be primarily responsible for enforcing this list of 20 The list is 30 long, but I think there's 2 items L&I indicated they would not be responsible for enforcing, but the vast majority of these, it's going to be L&I doing the inspections. It's going to be through the WISHA and also their Division of Occupational Health and Safety. So they have a number, as you've probably noticed, on the list listed with an email address and a complaint line at LNI. So they're going to be the ones receiving the bulk of the calls and the complaints with regard to this, or be referred from the Attorney General's line. And, you know, again, it says that these will be strictly construed. So following these are going to be absolutely important. And that failure to comply will result in shutting down the operation until the contractor can comply. So you can basically know at a minimum that your job site's going to be red tagged if L&I finds a violation, and it will be shut down until such time as you can remedy the issue. So, you know, again, short answer is, you know, do this. It's important for the industry to demonstrate we can comply with these. It's going to be important, frankly, for Greg and those who are now going to start negotiating phase 2, which will involve new projects and work that can be done closer than 6 feet, and eventually getting these restrictions lifted completely to demonstrate that we can comply. So, you know, I just wanted to stress that to you, and happy now to respond to your questions.
So the questions that I think are really in your alley that we've gotten are, first, what can we ask employees about their current medical status? What can we know about them? And second, what should we record about their medical status?
So under the ADA and also HIPAA, there are certain restrictions on employers asking for medical information and then also making decisions based on those medical conditions. And then there are certain requirements under HIPAA for how you store and log that information. I'm going to start the most obvious one that would arise under this particular set of health protocol would be the requirement to take the temperature of each employee and then make a decision essentially whether or not they can work that day based on whether or not they are, you know, whether or not they meet that 100.4 degree temperature threshold. Also asking them questions of whether or not they have had some of the symptoms associated with COVID-19. And ordinarily, in normal times, those could potentially cross a boundary in terms of what an employer can ask. But there has been special guidance issued by the EEOC, which in part enforces the Americans with Disability Act, and then similar guidance issued under our state counterpart to that, WALAD, which is the Washington Law Against Discrimination. And that guidance has said that given the nature of the pandemic, that asking employees whether or not they have had these certain symptoms and then also taking their temperature on job sites, not specific to construction, but for a variety of different job sites. My daughter just applied for a position at Dairy Queen today, and the protocol that they will be following at Dairy Queen is in terms of asking about symptoms daily and taking a temperature daily of each employee will be done at that job site. I think this will probably be across the board nationwide in a lot of different industries, and it'll just be part of the protocol. So they have essentially blessed this as an exception given the nature of the virus and the health issue that the country is facing right now. So that is, you will not be held liable for rendering decisions following this protocol that's specifically authorized by state law. There is no requirement to record the temperature. As I think Greg mentioned earlier, So there's not necessarily a need to store that data. Of course, if you have an employee who indicates that they have been sick, or let's say calls in and says, I've got a relative or I am experiencing these symptoms, then you will want to preserve that health and the anonymous nature of the, you won't want to reveal the employee's name. And so you will want to keep them anonymous, but at the same time, you can let your other employees know, hey, we've had a case on the job site, and then follow the rest of the protocol depending upon the nature of what they revealed. So you still would want to treat that information as protected as to the identity of that particular employee. If you've got a written document or you want to record it, for instance, on the form that's attached to the job plan, if somebody reports that they are sick, you'll want to keep that form confidential. You want to keep it in a locked area away from the view of other employees. You can store it, for instance, in a vehicle. A locked vehicle would be acceptable on the job site. And make sure that you give that to an HR person if you have that at your particular business, or if not, the owner of the company would be the appropriate custodian for that record. Sorry, that was a little long of an answer, but it was there was a lot to unpack in that question.
Yeah, definitely. For employers who have multiple job sites, can they avoid any bad enforcement actions by having a blanket safety plan for such as like service call jobs, like an electrician or a plumber, that they have one plan, but they don't have it specified to each job site?
You know, Greg might have some thoughts on this. My initial reaction is that you're required to have one of these plans at each job site. So I don't think you can avoid that by sort of having a general plan that will entail work at multiple job sites. There is no definition of job site in this particular document. So one question we've had is, what if we're working on a number of units, say, that are unoccupied, and we're doing work kind of there? Is each individual unit a job site, or can we consider the multiple units the job site? And I think especially where it's unoccupied, you could probably consider the multiple units, as long as you're doing work and you're following the protocol, and it's kind of all contained. It's not, you're not having to go to different areas. They're physically in the same proximity. I think that likely could be considered a single job site. But if you're having to move geographically to a different location, I think that would likely be considered a different job site. Greg may have an alternative view on that.
So just to be clear, I mean, the requirement does require a different, or a site safety plan for each job site, as Jackson said, and we've talked about. I think if you go through the sample document, the template that we have, I think there's probably a way to have most of it. I think there's probably a way to have most of it. You know, you might go to just take a look at it. There might be, you know, portions of it that could be generic enough, again, customized to your company and situation, where you would only have to change the location pieces of the site safety plan. But go through the document and look at it, but you are required to have a different plan for each job site.
And this includes sites you're only on for an hour, for example, to do one task?
Yes, but if you're in that case, you know, a lot of times you're working as a sub for somewhere, and so the site safety plan would be covered by the general too. So I get it if you're, you know, if you're working for a private, you know, if you're going to a you know, private residence job, then yes, you would be responsible for the site safety plan. If you're, you know, working for on multiple sites on new construction where you're, you know, a sub there, then the site safety plan that the general has would cover that site. So you coordinate in those circumstances, and that might get you out of the requirement if it's already covered by the general.
Okay.
And by new construction, I think Greg meant existing construction. That is, that is,
Yes.
not in an occupied dwelling or a remodel or something.
Correct. Thank you, Jackson.
The last big enforcement question I've gotten is it true that you could get jail time for not complying with this?
Yeah, the governor has been very clear in saying that that would be a last resort. Violation of his order is punishable as a gross misdemeanor, and that is $5,000 fine or almost a year in jail. I think it's 364 days in jail. So, so that is the ultimate penalty that you could be assessed. So if you are, I think the example that would be, if you are just flouting these rules, you're not trying to obey any of this stuff, and they show up to the job site and shut it down and you're just ignoring them, I think you could face potentially a violation. I think the most likely penalty would be a fine by L&I, and the fines are pretty substantial. I mean, they've got authority in current law for some of the fines to go up to $10,000. They sort of start at that $10,000 level. They would, it'd be up to $10,000 for the violations. But you could also, I think the punishment that's acknowledged within the phase 1 requirements document is a shutdown, and that also is a likely punishment. But yes, a criminal penalty is potentially there.
So Hannah, we're just past 5 o'clock. Why don't we ask one last question?
Okay, when will phase 2 start?
I'm going to give that one to Greg.
That's a great question. The working group is continuing to discuss phase 2. I think I mentioned earlier, we hope to send a plan to the governor this week with recommendations for phase 2. And at that point, it'll be up to the governor to decide when phase 2 will be implemented. We certainly will be advocating and pushing for that to happen as soon as possible. But frankly, I think that's somewhat up to us as an industry. If the governor is getting good reports from L&I and others that are the work that's being done out there is being done in compliance with the rules, and everybody is trying their best to keep to keep their workers safe, to keep the public safe, he'll be more inclined to start phase 2. If the reports that he's getting are the opposite of that, and that people aren't complying, they're trying to get around the rules or flout the rules or whatever, then I think he certainly will probably wait and not be inclined to do phase 2 quickly, and frankly might even put phase 1 in jeopardy, depending on how that goes. So it really is incumbent upon us as an industry to, as difficult as it may be, to accept the fact that we've got these new requirements that we have to live up to and accommodate on our job sites. It really is incumbent upon us to do everything we can to be in compliance, maintain compliance, and keep our employees in compliance when they're on the job site. And frankly, there's going to be a transition there. Habits are hard to break, and you get onto a job site, you get to working, and you don't think about a lot of this stuff. You just kind of fall into old ways of doing things, and suddenly people won't be wearing masks, or they be slipping into closer than 6 feet distances. You really, especially early on, you need to help people, remind them to comply, keep them in compliance, make sure that whoever is kind of supervising the site is watching for those types of things, and really put this into the culture of how you're operating on your job sites. And if that goes well, then I think we can expect to see phase 2, fairly soon. But if we've got problems out there, then it's going to be delayed. So thank you, Hannah. I didn't introduce Hannah properly before. Hannah Markley is our Associate General Counsel, another attorney on staff at BIW, and she's been managing all the questions. So thank you, Hannah, for doing that. I really want to thank Joseph Irons, our Senior Officer, for doing his presentation, and of course Jackson Maynard, our General Counsel, for talking about enforcement. Before we go, I want to remind you one last time to go to the BIW website for all the materials that we have discussed and talked about. If you go to the main homepage here, just go down, click on Return to Safety. That brings up our job site safety plan or web page. All of the documents that I mentioned are available for you to download and utilize to be in compliance quickly. We have a recording from the webinar that we posted on Wednesday or on Saturday. A recording of this webinar will also be posted up there if you want to go back and view it and cover, just kind of refresh yourself on some topics we covered or some of the answers to questions we gave. I also want to point out over on the right-hand side over here is a link to PPE resources. So huge list of potential sources for all types of PPE, thermometers, the hand washing station, eye protection, everything. A lot of different sources here where you can try and access those materials so that you can get in compliance on your website as well. So with that, I want to really thank you. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope you found this helpful. As I mentioned right at the top, we will keep the questions that you answered. We've logged those, and we'll try and get responses out to you in the next couple days. On your screen right now is contact information. If you have other questions, you can email us at that info@biw.com email, and we will respond to your questions. We want to do everything we can to get you the information you need to get out and get working again. That was the whole goal of this thing, is to get you guys out on the job site, get employees out there, and get our industry moving again and back out there. So thank you very much again for being with us this afternoon, and all the best as you head to your job sites. Thank you. Bye-bye.